Hello everyone. GS paper 1 is done in the 9 to 12 slot. Let us discuss what questions came on the topic history, right? And we would try to understand what all things we are supposed to cover. We would understand questions came on which areas and a brief discussion of all those questions. Let me give you a brief understanding of the areas covered by UPSC this year. And there's a current dimension as well, interestingly, to history. A question came on ancient India, that is Mauryan Empire, particularly on Ashok's inscriptions. A question came on Macaulay Minute of Education, something that Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, brought into current affairs. A question came on the freedom struggle, Gandhian movement. Macaulay's question can be categorized into a question on company rule, and the question on Gandhian movement was mass movement. Gandhi imparted mass movement character to the international movement. That can be considered as question on freedom struggle. And there's a question on medieval history, 15 marker on Vijayanagar architecture. There was question on, I'm a little bit confused what to call it, question on post-independence, two questions rather. But the last question was connecting post-independence with the colonial legacy. So that was the nature. So I'm repeating that. One question on ancient, one question on medieval, right? One question on company rule, one question on freedom struggle, two questions on post-independence, but one of them connecting to the colonial legacy of British rule, right? Let us look at the first question. Analyze importance of Ashokan inscriptions for reconstructing Mauryan history. Interestingly, this question is for 150 words, but a lot can be written. A lot can be written. To begin with, please understand you have to write that it enabled us to discover the Mauryan Empire. I'm saying this because we got to know about Mauryan Empire somewhere in the decade of 1910s. Before that, Puranas mentioned the kingdom of Mauryas as a Shudra Prayasta Adharmika kingdom. And it was listed among many small kingdoms. We did not even know that it was huge empire, sort of all India empire. So James Prinsep discovering that Maski edict, different edicts rather, and deciphering the Brahmi script, and then eventually discovery of Maski edict in 1910s. That established connection between the terms that James Prinsep deciphered, that is Devanampiya Priyadashi, used by Ashok. We got to know that in 1910s. And then the search for such edicts, inscriptions started, and then we realized that it was an empire. So first point is discovery of empire. Second, the extent of empire, right? Wherever those edicts were found, we can understand that that much was the authority of Ashok's empire. We need to understand this very carefully, right from Afghanistan in the northwest up to Bengal, right, today's Bangladesh, up to Mysore in the south. That was the extent of empire. So huge kind of an empire, first empire in India. So the first thing is discovery of empire, extent of empire. Second, we get to know a lot about Ashok's personality, his career, important events, development during his reign as emperor. We understand his policies, his policy of Dhamma, which was a practical policy of ethics, ethical conduct followed by the subjects of the empire. We also get to know his policy towards Kaling, the Kaling War, the impact of Kaling War on personality of Ashok. So these are important developments from Ashok's personality. That is second aspect. Third, we also get to know the administration of Mauryan Empire. We get to know nature of the Mauryan state, that was monarchical, hereditary monarchical, plus centralized welfare state. It also talked about welfare of the animals. It outlines what is Dhamma policy. So we get to know policies of the state as well, right? We also understand foreign policy for that matter. So Rock Edict number 13 talks about Ashok's relations with Hellenistic kingdoms, right? So we get to know foreign policy. So policy aspect, structure of the administration, we get to know the nature of the state in terms of centralized welfare state, right? And we also get to know about foreign policy of the Mauryan state. A lot of information can be found from Ashokan inscriptions. Secondly, and very importantly, it also tells us about administrative and cultural diversity of the empire, right? It was huge empire, and that's why you see some changes in the provincial administration. Plus, we also get to know the cultural diversity, because in different edicts, took into consideration the language spoken by people at that time and the script. So variations in script, variations in language indicate the cultural diversity. The administration of Ashok was taken into consideration the variations in different regions. That is another important policy aspect we get to know about Ashok's empire. Secondly, very importantly, Ashokan inscriptions help us bridge what has been portrayed in literature, right, and what was the reality. So historical Ashok, literary Ashok. So for example, Lama Tarannath, 16th century Tibetan Buddhist figure, he talks about Ashok in terms of Kam Ashok, Chanda Ashok, and Dhamma Ashok. Kam Ashok, the one who was immersed in pleasures, right? Chanda Ashok, who became quite cruel while becoming king, killed 99 brothers, which is quite exaggerated kind of figure, right? And then Dhamma Ashok. Suddenly he came in contact with the Buddhist Dhamma and everything changed. The point is, this is all exaggeration, because Ashok in his inscriptions has mentioned about officers appointed to take care of his brothers and their families. So Ashokan inscriptions invalidate what was portrayed in literature. So Ashok inscriptions can be relied on because those are contemporary evidences. So contemporary evidence matters more in order to understand the developments at that time as compared to retrospective literature. That is very important point. Secondly, as we are pointing to Ashok's Dhamma, which was influenced by Buddhism and other religions as well, but it was influence of Buddhism on Ashok. And Ashok's relation with Buddhism, Ashok's relation with Buddhist Sangh can also be understood through Ashok's inscription. So overall, we get a lot of information about Mauryan Empire from Ashok inscriptions. Ashok's personality, nature of the state, administration, cultural diversity, script, language, extent of the empire, discovery of empire, different policies of the empire, and in the end, I must tell you, we also get to know about the chronology of Ashok's time period and thereby the Mauryan chronology, right? Okay. That is about importance of Ashokan inscriptions for reconstruction of Mauryan history. Second question, second 10 marker. Discuss the impact of Macaulay's Minute on colonial administration and education in India. Please understand, there are two aspects to this question. Macaulay's Minute, I would discuss about that briefly, and its impact on what? Colonial administration, number one, and number two, education in India. Okay, let's talk about this. Prime Minister of India criticized Macaulay and he said that we should get rid of Macaulay mindset. There is an element of truth in what he said, but he kind of blanketly covered everything and did not really underline significance of the education introduced by Macaulay, indirect significance rather, right? There is no doubt Macaulay introduced education with three purposes. Rather, British government introduced anglicized education, Anglicist point of view, with three objectives. One was commercial, second was administrative, third was evangelical. And evangelical objective, commercial objective, was also part of administration. They wanted to govern India, administer India, to benefit the commercial interest of Britain. And in the words of Macaulay himself, he clearly said that, writing to his father, if I implement my scheme of education in Bengal, 10 years henceforth, there will be no Bengali who is either Hindu or Muslim. So clearly he was indicating what? Evangelization, Christianization of India. That is one important aspect of his administrative policy, right? Through education. Second, and very importantly, the fundamental change that we see brought by Macaulay's Minute in the philosophy of governance. Okay, what is that exactly? Before Macaulay, before Benting's administration, so to say, the philosophy of company rule was based on Orientalism. And please understand, the whole debate in Macaulay committee was Orientalist versus Anglicist. What was that Orientalism? The Orientalist philosophy of governance that was in a way started by Warren Hastings rather explicitly was based on learning Indian knowledge, Indian customs, traditions. Why? In order to make yourself conversant about Indian traditions, customs, and thereby govern them effectively. Number one. Number two, do not introduce Indians to modern education. That would make them aware of the foreign rule, that will make them aware of exploitation. And unnecessarily we are attracting a challenge. That is why the Orientalist philosophy believed in learning about India that would enable them govern India effectively, and that would also ensure the subjectivity of Indians to British rule. They would remain subjective. That was the philosophy. But with the new philosophies coming in, free trade policy, liberalism, utilitarianism, and evangelicalism, these influences were carried by the Bentinck administration. And Macaulay Committee comes under Bentinck administration. So new philosophy came in that is called modernizing Indians, not for the benefit of Indians, for the benefit of British rule. So how would it benefit British rule? Administratively speaking, it would provide chief human resource, make people understand British customs, traditions, British political ideas, British administration, and that pool of middle class that would come out of it, that is called rise of Indian middle class, which also became Indian middle class intelligentsia. That is a different impact altogether. We will talk about that as well. So one impact is on colonial administration in terms of getting chief human resource, to man clerical staff, to create human resource for administration, particularly lower rung. Despite that section 87 of Charter Act 1833, that Bentinck wanted British Parliament to insert, it was inserted that there would be no bar on higher positions, right, for Indians. But that remained on paper. So it was primarily to create human resource for lower administration. That is one important objective of Macaulay's minute as far as administration is concerned. Second, the commercial one. The administration here was to promote British goods here. So in the language of Macaulay, to create brown men with white taste. The objective of his minute was to educate people of India, to make them brown men with white taste, so that they demand British goods from necktie to shoes. That was another objective. Third was evangelization that I talked about, right? Apart from this, they wanted to promote English as official language, so that even Indians can transact the administrative business in the English language, courts, legislature, executive, everything, right? So this is third aspect. Fourth, education was used as tool of colonial governance. What does that mean? Instrument of governance. That means educate people of India, make them aware of British rule, and make them compliant to the British rule, bring political obligation, win legitimacy, create an Indian educated elite class that would function as supporters of British rule. And we saw that in case of moderates, though the moderates had different other important objectives, but from the British perspective, the purpose of education was to create one elite class that would work as a supporting structure for British rule. That is also called cultural governance. Make them culturally English, and thereby the admirers of British rule, right? So in short, creation of colonial elite. The purpose was creation of colonial elite in Indian society who would take up the government jobs and would also become the support base. Okay, that is one aspect. Second aspect of the question is impact of Macaulay's minute on education in India. There are two things here. One, the decline of traditional education. Second, introduction of modern education. So all these two aspects had different implications. So decline of traditional education has got a debatable kind of dimension, where some people say that India had a lot of good things from ancient past and that was discarded. There are others who say that most of the Indian education prior to the introduction of modern education was pre-modern and hence custom-based, religion-based, and that's why there was little scope for improvement. That is debatable. Let us not go into it. One thing that we should note in the answer is decline of traditional education in India, introduction of modern education. And when you say modern education, what was introduced? As per the Anglicist view, English would be medium of instruction and Western sciences would be introduced, from Isaac Newton to John Locke to Rousseau and the ideas espoused by French Revolution, etc., right? So intellectual modernization, again, that is debatable. So education sought to bring intellectual modernization, but obviously for commercial purposes, for administrative purposes that I talked about. But at the same time, it is argued that by the critics that it was Western type of modernity, right? It was Western type of modernity. That is again debatable. Let us not go into debates. But whatever type of modernity that was sought to be brought by English education introduced by Macaulay's committee. It is also true that we are not denying the fact that it was for the purpose of evangelization of India. Mentioned that as well. So educational purpose was evangelization, but that impact was not profound. What happened profoundly was English became lingua franca across India. That helped them in administration. English becoming lingua franca means common language. English becoming lingua franca also helped Indian nationalism. All of you know that even today, Hindi is not accepted in southern states, particularly Tamil Nadu. If you want to create one political organization at the national level, you need to communicate your idea that we are one nation, we are ruled by the foreigners, and we need to get rid of that foreign rule. We need to struggle for the rights. All these things are to be articulated in a language that is understood by, say, Tamil, say Punjabi, say Bengali, say Marathi, say Hindi, Urdu, right? So lingua franca. So English became lingua franca, and that also promoted the growth of Indian nationalism in turn, right? Okay, that is third aspect. Fourth, it contributed to Indian nationalism in general, because Indian nationalism now was fed on the philosophies of, say, John Locke, Rousseau, right? These kind of Jeremy Bentham. So new ideas, J.S. Mill for that matter, who wrote the book on liberty. The ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, democracy, nation, nationalism. So Indian middle class intelligentsia fed on these ideas, started challenging British rule. So that is very important development, which leads to what? Emergence of Indian national movement, right? Systematically with the formation of INC, right? Next, it is also argued in a critical tone, right? This education created Indian elite, and thereby it promoted inequality, elitist kind of education. So an elite class, middle class intelligentsia was created. That is fine. That is true. We are not denying it. But at the same time, we need to understand that though it created an elite, that elite sought to reform Indian society. So one important impact of Macaulay's minute on education, and thereby the impact of education society, was socio-religious reform movements. So a lot of points can be written here. Apart from that, education also led to emergence of modern press, right? Print culture, emergence of public sphere, or so to say, civil society. So all these things contributed immensely to development of India politically, Indian nationalism, social reform movements, and eventually international movement as well, right? To that you can write in question number 2, right? Then question number 3, the significance of Gandhian movements lay in masses they mobilized, elucidate. Again, a lot can be written. See, you need to understand the development of another evolution of Indian national movement from moderates to extremists to Gandhian phase. Moderate time period was characterized by elitist movement. There is no doubt about that, right? We are not using the word of Dufferin, who called it microscopic minority, but yes, they were minority. The educated elites, struggling for the rights, right? They did not include masses. In fact, the reformers like Jyotirao Phule criticized it for having that upper caste character, right? Secondly, Congress never touched the problems of peasants, right? Though they talked about economic drain theory, it was more about how India is being drained. They did not talk about the domestic drain at the hands of zamindars. It required Congress to reach 1930s to talk about the problems of peasant in terms of reduction of rent. For the first time in Congress resolution, the point of reduction of rent comes in 1930s, when Gandhi made mass movement and other thoughts came in, which influenced the whole philosophy of nationalism and Congress philosophy. Till then, Congress was elitist. There's no doubt about that. It was Gandhi who overcame that elitist character of Congress, and thereby international movement, imparting it a mass character. There's no doubt about it. And thereby, he qualitatively transformed Indian national movement. Bipin Chandra clearly mentioned this. It was Gandhi who imparted that mass character. Though Sumit Sarkar says that there was a difference, right? Though Gandhi's efforts cannot be ignored, sidelined, though we understand significance of Gandhi in making this movement mass movement, Sumit Sarkar says that at the same time you have to recognize the autonomy of local movements irrespective of Gandhian influence. There are these kind of views as well, but by and large we have this kind of opinion coming out of all the historians that Gandhi imparted mass character to the international movement. Then the question is how? Because it asks us to understand significance of Gandhi in making masses politically active. That could be another way of saying it, mobilizing masses or making them politically active. We need to understand how Gandhi began. When he returned from South Africa to India in 1915, he first started Champaran, Kheda, Ahmedabad satyagrahas. Please understand, these are the satyagrahas for peasants and workers. Before Gandhi, nobody mobilized peasant workers to this extent. And therefore, we need to understand that Gandhi brought these sections of Indian society into the mainstream, and he politically mobilized them. And those three movements were successful. So thereby, he established an appeal with peasants and workers. So wherever he gives an appeal, these people will join the mainstream Indian national movement that was quite visible in NCM and CDM. So explain NCM, CDM in detail in terms of participation from youth, traders, professional classes like lawyers, teachers, from businessmen to tribals to Adivasis to women, regional participation from Northeast, from Bengal, from Maharashtra, from South India, from Punjab to North. So you see regional participation, you see participation from all classes, you see participation from Hindus and Muslims. He combined that NCM with Khilafat, tried to bring Hindu-Muslim mobilization, and more importantly, brought women in the movement. He made them politically active agents. So all these things we need to understand. Plus, he brought urban participation and rural participation in both NCM and CDM. He brought Adivasis through opposition to forest laws. So all these things through non-cooperation CDM movements. And why masses got connected? Because Gandhi's methodology was more acceptable to them. It is really difficult for masses to sacrifice their whole life, something that is revolutionary ideology. But masses found it quite acceptable to go and march, to fast, to resist the government without being violent, so that government doesn't become violent to you. So these were the ways in which he connected with masses. Secondly, what Sumit Sarkar highlights, right? The agenda of national movement was connected to the local grievances by Gandhi. That is very interesting, right? And thereby he connected the whole movement with masses. For example, pick up the topic of salt. That is a day-to-day kind of commodity. Everybody needs it, rich and poor. So kind of he brought everyone into the political mainstream by connecting charkha, right? Employment to the people, his constructive program, right? All these things can be written in the answer. And then this whole momentum that he created, whole momentum, including all the sections, all the regions, different classes, and more importantly, different castes. He broke caste lines, right? Reached out to Dalits. Abolition of untouchability was an important part of his constructive program. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar differed with him. They had their doctrinal differences. They had differences in approaches. But he reached out to Harijans, that he used to call to Dalits. His Harijan tour, Harijan Mahasangh, all these things, his mouthpiece rather, his newspaper. So all these things was conscious attempt on the part of Gandhi to establish connect with different castes. So he brought all of them together. So this entire mass acquired a momentum that went beyond Gandhi's control. It in Quit India movement. Literalist mass literally drove that movement. So no doubt about that. So there's significance of Gandhi movements in terms of the masses he mobilized. And okay, let me tell you significance of his mass movements from the perspective of British. Sometimes you evaluate, you assess from the perspective of those whom you are opposing. He was opposing British rule through mass movements, right? Gandhi reading talks, Gandhi Irwin talks were heavily criticized by Britishers back home. They thought that half-naked fakir, that's how they used to describe Gandhi, right? And all Indians were looked at with contempt. Their contention was these two, Viceroy Reading during NCM and Viceroy Irwin during CDM, right? Sat across the table with Gandhi for negotiation. Thereby, they made Gandhi at par with Viceroy, which was not needed. But please understand, these two countered this view by saying that Gandhi was bringing rural masses into the movement, and that is impossible to counter. Once Indian national movement becomes rural, right? Because 90% of India lived in rural areas. So that would be difficult to counter. So that was the reason. So that indicates significance of Gandhian movements in terms of masses they mobilized. Okay, just a moment. Right. Now these are 15 markers. We talked about 10 markers. Let us now talk about 15 markers. This was one question in medieval history. Vijayanagar architecture exemplifies amalgamation of past traditions. And when we say past traditions, traditions of Chola, Cheras, Pandyas, Chalukyas, Hoysalas, right? They carried forward that tradition, right? In terms of both, in terms of religious architecture, secular architecture. When you say religious architecture, it is about temple architecture. They carried forward that Dravidian style of architecture with their innovations. That is the question here, contemporary practice and innovations. Secondly, in the secular domain, right? Their royal architecture, then what you can say, town planning, architecture of cities, and different other structures, Lotus Mahal, for example. All these things also carry what? Amalgamation of past traditions with contemporary practices. So what does that refer to, contemporary practices? Other South Asian practices, and particularly the architecture of Deccani Sultanates. Features of Deccani Sultanates were also borrowed by Vijayanagar emperors into their architecture. So that becomes the crux of the question, and you have to explain that with examples. So to begin with, they inherited architectural styles of what is called Dravidian temple architecture, plus the royal architecture of Chalukyas, Pandyas, Cholas, Pallavas, Hoysalas. Hoysala features can be seen, Chalukya features can be seen in their secular architecture as well. Along with this, they also incorporated new elements, new aesthetic elements, structural elements. Like, for example, they were not hesitant in borrowing the arch and dome method from Deccani Sultanates, right? Vaulted roof, for example. So all these elements were fused with the traditional South Indian agriculture. Number two. Number three, in temple architecture, they continued with the basic structure elements of what is called Dravidian school of temple architecture with innovation. And what were the innovations? So, for example, use of huge number of pillars. So multi-pillared hall, and most of them were ornamental. Huge ornamentation can be seen, right, on the pillars. So pillars were not serving merely the purpose of the structural support, but they were museums of art. So that's how they converted that whole idea of pillars. Secondly, they came up with innovative mandapams, which later on became famous as Kalyan Mandap, right? That is in the temple architecture. They elaborated on gopuram. Gopurams, the entrance gateway of temples, right? And more importantly, another secular structure. I'm talking about temples, and I'll continue with that. But the linked kind of structure, Raya Gopurams. Raya Gopurams were royal gateways. Wherever Vijayanagar emperor visited, right, to commemorate that visit, Raya Gopurams were erected. And so far as the temple innovation structures are concerned, you can give examples of Virupaksha temple, for example, right? You can give example of Vitthal temple in Hampi. So these are the examples which exhibit, because you are supposed to explain that with examples, right? So these structures you can mention. Apart from Dravidian architecture, Raya Gopurams, you can see Lotus Mahal and elephant stables, right, which clearly carry the imprints of Deccani Sultanate architecture. So you mentioned these examples as well, how those things were used. Arches, domes, vaulted roofs, which are features, stucco design, right, decoration, which was borrowed from Deccani Sultanate. So all these things clearly tell us the fusion of the traditional elements of architecture, innovation of Vijayanagar emperors, plus this thing, the combination with contemporary traditions, right? Okay. Apart from temple and secular royal architecture, you can also talk about Hampi as a city in terms of urban architecture, its division, different areas, its significance, and imprint of the Deccani Sultanate as well, right? So urban architecture. And the last thing that I would say is water architecture, hydraulics, right? So one example is Kamalpuram tank, constructed by Vijayanagar emperors. So the examples can be given to explain this, right? Next question, next 15 marker. Linguistic reorganization of Indian states was driven by popular pressure from below. There were two questions of comment, this one and this one. And please understand, the statements which are given in the question, those are partially true, not fully true. And that is why your comment should clearly carry that meaning. Your comment should clearly carry that meaning. I would explain that with both these questions, right? So linguistic reorganization of Indian states was driven by popular pressure from below. There is no doubt about that. But before we come to that Andhra example, which epitomizes this statement, right? We need to understand the background to what is called linguistic reorganization. This point is very important. When you say linguistic reorganization, right? So right from pre-independence times, right? Turk talked about, Lokmanya Turk, Bal Gangadhar Turk talked about linguistic reorganization being most important way administration, provincial administration in India, because you cannot transact business with the government, that is administration, in some other language other than what people speak. So there was support among different leaders from Turk to Nehru, right? As far as linguistic reorganization is concerned, even Patel and everybody, right? Pattabhi Sitaramaya, that became JVP committee later on. That support in a way evaporated. So what factors impacted the linguistic reorganization of states immediately after Indian independence, in the immediate aftermath of Indian independence? That factor was partition. So we need to understand this. First of all, you talk about background of international movement, and as I said, that broad support for linguistic organization. What marks a deviation? See, elites first agreed to linguistic reorganization, and later on elites became against linguistic reorganization. Then the pressure from below made them go for it. That's what I'm trying to say in the introduction, right? Okay, so elites supported the linguistic reorganization from Turk to Patel to Nehru, right? And then partition made them quite skeptical about the idea, because in Europe most of the nations are based on language. So linguistic nationalism should not emerge, and it should not lead to what is called balkanization of India, dismemberment of India. So experience of partition made them skeptical about linguistic reorganization, and hence different committees did not entertain the demands of linguistic reorganization, JVP committee being one of them. And JVP committee is important because that includes Jawaharlal, right, Vallabhbhai and Pattabhi Sitaramaya. All three were part of freedom struggle. All three earlier supported linguistic reorganization. They became skeptical after partition of India. So this stand of elites, governing people against linguistic reorganization was in a way stonewalled by that demand for separate Andhra Pradesh. Patti Sriramalu's movement and his death, because of fast unto death, ultimately created first linguistic state, that is Andhra Pradesh. So clearly it was driven by popular pressure from below. But we cannot deny the favorable opinion of elites prior to what happened in case of Andhra. Then you can explain this statement with number of other examples. So Andhra movement, Sanyukta Maharashtra movement, Maha Gujarat movement, Karnataka Ekikaran movement, and number Punjabi Suba movement. You give these examples and a couple of lines about those movements. In fact, Sanyukta Maharashtra movement in a way led to sacrifice of the people. Some 100 people sacrificed themselves, who are called martyrs in Mumbai, right? Hutatma Smarak. So all these things. But having said that, you need to comment on this, right? Having said that, this was not the only factor. And there are many other factors. National security, that was a factor in case of number of states. Then viability of state, right? Administrative convenience. So number of things, regional imbalance of development. You mentioned all this, and role of the elite leaders, role of regional elites, role of regional political parties. Write all these points. So we talked about explanation of this point, and we talked about other factors which were also responsible for linguistic reorganization. Thereby, you comment that this was an important factor, no doubt about that, but there were other factors as well to make it more comprehensive. That should be your comment. Okay. The last question, 13. The model of planned economy was adopted in India to address regional imbalances left behind by colonial rule. Comment. Please understand. There was a definite colonial legacy. There is no doubt about that. And how do we look at colonial legacy? Number one, regional imbalances resulting from, right, focus on presidency towns, right? Second, the kind of developmental model or the implementation that differs from British provinces to Indian states. Indian states were governed by Indian rulers in name and with some authority, right? Overall controlled by the British. So for example, let me take an example. So you look at Maharashtra, you look at undivided Andhra of earlier times, and you look at Karnataka, right? Central provinces covered the Vidarbha portion of Maharashtra, the Bombay province covered western Maharashtra, and Marathwada region of Maharashtra, Telangana region of Andhra, and northeastern Karnataka of Karnataka state were under Nizam state. And precisely these areas are backward areas today. So Vidarbha within Maharashtra, northeastern Karnataka within Karnataka, and Telangana. And that is why Telangana demanded a separate state eventually, right? We need to understand this. So uneven kind of development because of division in terms of what? Number one, British provinces. Number two, Indian states. Another imbalance was uneven industrialization. British focused on, regionally speaking, presidency towns. And the whole industrialization was not to develop India, but to meet imperial interest. And thereby, there was infrastructural imbalance as well. Infrastructural imbalance. The infrastructure was geared towards exporting raw material to Britain and ensuring the finished goods reach Indian hinterland. One-way free trade. And the railway minute of Dalhousie and subsequently how railway was developed can also be seen in this manner. The railway lines were connected to the port. Rather than connecting within India, different markets, it was connected to the ports to enable raw material supply and the export of British goods to India. So this was colonial legacy. And then most importantly, another colonial legacy, very important because that is connected to planning, is economic drain and thereby resulting capital scarcity. This is why Indian planning was linked to socialism, and we would discuss that. So this is legacy, right? As far as imbalance is concerned. So first thing that you're highlighting is no doubt that British left us legacy of regional imbalance with all these points. Having said that, was that the only purpose of planning? No. There are multiple purposes. One of them was to get rid of regional imbalances. What were other purposes? Rapid development of India, industrialization, right? Overcoming capital scarcity, dealing with the severe problems of poverty, unemployment, right? And more importantly, to mobilize scarce resources and to direct investment to priority sectors. So all these were additional points apart from addressing regional imbalance. So you conclude by commenting that no doubt this was very important, right? But at the same time, planning was driven by other factors that are enlisted. So that's how you can answer. And the comment has been a little bit different in both the questions. All right. So these were questions, quite balanced kind of paper this year, and questions were quite interesting. There was connect to current as well in terms of Mekong Committee and reorganization of states. So that's it as far as this year's history questions are concerned and the analysis is concerned. Thank you so much.